If you thought peak SUV happened in the 1990s, think again, because I think we truly live in the golden era of the off-road SUV. We have entries that have been resurrected from the grave like the Ford Bronco, more options than ever to choose from in the United States thanks to new models like this Ineos Grenadier right next to me. And yes, this is our Ineos Grenadier. I actually bought it yesterday and drove it up from Pasadena. Before any of you ask in the comment section, yes, I got hit on my head. No, that did not cause me to buy a Grenadier. Why then did I get this? Well, there are a few reasons. The first one is, obviously, it looks totally cool. We get some classic Land Rover Defender going on here, a little bit of Mercedes-Benz G-Wagon in the hood, and then certainly some post-war French sedan, maybe Citroën going on with this grille that protrudes from the headlights, auxiliary off-road lights here, and that V shape in the grille. It looks like nothing else on sale in North America, and I think it looks epic. So clearly that was a reason. Then there's the engineering behind the design of the Grenadier. This is also like nothing else on sale in North America, but the closest thing would be a Jeep Wrangler, because like the Wrangler, this has solid axles in the front and in the back, not just in the rear, like we find in a Bronco or a Land Cruiser or a Mercedes-Benz G-Wagon. Those all have independent front suspensions. So this is much more of a purpose-built off-road vehicle that's laser-focused on off-road capability, and they were willing to give up a lot of on-road civility that we find in a Land Cruiser or a G-Wagon or a Ford Bronco. This is going in a very different direction. Then there's the story, which is also pretty cool. Jim Ratcliffe, the CEO of Ineos, is the richest person in Britain. He loves Defenders. He wanted to continue building the old body-on-frame Defender when the new model came out, so he approached Jaguar Land Rover, said, hey, can I buy the tooling and everything to continue building it? They said no, so he met some dudes in a pub and he designed the Grenadier. And that's interestingly where the name comes from too. This is named after the Grenadier pub in Belgravia. And that also is kind of interesting, because not only is this the only vehicle on sale in North America named after a pub in London, it's also the only vehicle named after a guy who was a card cheat and then got beaten to death because he was cheating at cards, because that's where that pub got its name from way back in the 1900s. Both the design and the engineering of the Grenadier are a blend of ancient and modern. We have full LED headlights on each side. These are auxiliary lights in the middle. They are only available when you're in the off-road mode. The high beams and the low beams are in these outboard circular modules. That's mainly due to varying light regulations around the world that limit the number of beams you can have shining forward at one time. There's some slight aero curtains going on here to help reduce pressure up front, so there's a little bit of a nod to fuel efficiency. Down here we have a full metal bumper, which did surprise me, because this design, part of the reason we have this protruding front end is because of pedestrian crash safety requirements in Europe. So I'm surprised that we were able to get full metal bumpers. Like we find in some other off-road vehicles, these are replaceable in sections as well. Obviously we have full undercarriage protection down there and a whole lot of cooling going on in that front end. Especially for a vehicle designed and engineered for Europe, the dimensions may come as a surprise to you. This is notably bigger than a four-door Wrangler. It's nearly 6 inches longer, over 2 inches wider, and nearly 7 inches taller than a Wrangler. Some of that is because of European pedestrian crash regulations. They have to set the engine a little bit further back in the body, necessitating a slightly longer hood profile. And that long hood profile and boxy proportions definitely gives this sort of an off-road bread van vibe, at least to me, but also one that I really like. I appreciate the slab-sided design, which is part of why I like the Wrangler. Now, Ineos did give us a little bit of a bell curve to the body to keep it from looking too slab-sided, but it is still very vertical. Unlike the Wrangler, the windshield, the roof, and the doors are not designed to easily come off. Yes, you could unscrew these visible hinges from the doors and take them off, but that was not the original design intent. So if you want that kind of off-road vehicle, you want a Wrangler. If you want safari windows, then you want something like this. Ineos went with a very classic door handle design and very heavy doors. These have a solid Germanic feel to the way they open and close, and you really have to want to close that door to actually get it to latch. The utility belt here is optional. That's what Ineos calls this channel here. It allows you to install accessories and bolt things to the side of your vehicle. The tubular rails here on the roofline are designed to help you get up to the roof a little bit more easily, and of course to tie down cargo that may be up there on the roof. Then behind this little box here, we find electrical connections that are available. These connectors are part of the auxiliary switch option package. They're good for 10 amps each, and there are 4 total, 2 on each side. I opted to get the steel wheels, and I chose not to get the KO2s from the factory. Instead, these are the Bridgestone Dueler All-Terrains, because I figured I could always swap in some mud terrain tires later if I wanted to. Out back, we get these interesting circular LED taillights and a bifold door that reminds me an awful lot of a Land Cruiser 70 with the sort of 2/3, 1/3 door. So that swings to the side right there. This is probably because in Europe, parking situations are going to be a little bit tighter and they didn't want just one big door that swung all the way to one side. The downside here is that if you accidentally close and latch this door first, and then you try and close this one, the latch mechanism is actually going to bop the paint right there. And I am surprised they didn't put some sort of rubber stopper there to keep you from doing that. Because the Grenadier was not designed with a convertible roof like the Wrangler was, we have a much bigger and squarer cargo area that's not affected by any sort of cross beams going on in the rear. Although you'll notice that the load floor is relatively high, and that's because of that solid axle design, the fact that we still have to have the muffler and things like that packaged underneath that load floor, even though, of course, we have the spare tire on the back of this door. I opted not for the storage compartment there, but you can get a lockable little storage thing right there in the middle of your spare tire. I did, however, get what I think is a very practical option, and that is this ladder, because if you do plan on putting things on top of the roof, it is designed for load, you need some way to get up there. And because the roof line is so tall, the integrated ladder makes an awful lot of sense. What makes a little bit less sense is the way that this hitch is designed. You'll notice that the safety chain locations are actually part of this hitch mount here. You'll find them just under that pin. That is relatively unusual for a vehicle in North America, although this does have a fairly stout 7,700 pound towing capability. You'll notice that they put the exhaust tips tucked up under the bumper there, right next to those recovery hooks. One of the most interesting features on this vehicle is right here behind this unscrewable port. So if I screw this off here, you'll notice we have what they call a NATO power plug. This allows you to connect a 500 amp 12 volt accessory to the vehicle. That would allow you to do things like power a winch mounted on that hitch, or you could use it to do something that I find myself doing a little bit more often than maybe I should admit, which is jump starting the Cummins engine in this chipper. Although the jury is still out on this, I suspect that servicing the Grenadier should be relatively easy. Again, should and jury still out being key here. Not just because we have this very vertical hood or the really cool twin location prop rod setup where I can relocate this prop rod to the front and have a different hood angle, but because of the engine itself. Instead of going off in their own direction, Grenadier decided to purchase a 3-liter inline-6 turbo engine and transmission and all the related control systems from BMW. So there's an awful lot of BMW under this hood, and that should make parts a lot easier to find and less expensive than if they just went out and did their own thing. Now, there are a few tweaks to the engine, mainly relating to the oil pan and the oil sump below for more rugged off-road duty. Power output comes in at 281 horsepower, 332 pound-feet of torque. It's mated directly to the ZF 8-speed automatic transmission that we also see in a variety of different BMWs. But after that, it's all Grenadier. We have a Tremec 2-speed transfer case with a true center differential, then of course Carraro axles front and rear. Carraro axle is mainly known for making axles for tractors like JCBs and John Deeres and Case tractors, etc., but we find that kind of heavy-duty axle on this. On the subject of the prop rod, although you can relocate it to the back, there is no ability to store the prop rod in the back, so you do have to relocate it to the front in order to close the hood. Let's go ahead and check out the interior now. As you can see, I did not get the rubber floor mats. I am really regretting that. These are the carpet floor mats. We have manual seats for the driver and front passenger. These are made by Recaro, and there's no adjustable lumbar support, which I do find a bit of a bummer. That's the one thing that I think I would change. I find the rest of the seat design relatively comfortable. I did spend 6 hours in this yesterday driving up from Los Angeles. You see the Recaro logo there. It's kind of a combination of this sort of a wetsuity kind of material and then fabric in the middle, so that way it breathes better. That same fabric material is carried over to the doors, where we find that as an insert right there, and then we find the scourge of modern automotive designs here as well. Shiny black plastic on the doors. I think that's kind of a weird choice for an off-road vehicle. There isn't too much in here, but there is some. Generally speaking, the interior design is more modern than retro, although we do have some retro touches like this brown leather steering wheel. This is optional. You also get the brown wrap on the parking brake and a brown wrap over there for the passenger handle. The steering wheel is kind of interesting because it has a toot button, and it has a horn, and you can horn and toot at the same time. I don't know why you would ever want to do that, but hey, that's pretty cool. Over here we have controls for the cruise control, no adaptive cruise control, just regular cruise control, infotainment buttons over here. Behind the wheel, we have the thing that I don't like about this interior. No instrument cluster. Instead, they just have, you know, the safety lights there. They call it the telltale display. So headlights, if I turn the headlights on, those icons are going to be there, etc. Warning indications, all those will appear there. Everything else is handled by this touchscreen in the middle. The touchscreen, you know, it's a little bit slower than I might like, but I think I will get used to it over time. The left portion of the screen is not touch enabled, the right portion is. You can see we have lots of off-road displays like the electrical display there, altitude, you can see what your tire pressure, your transfer case temperatures are, etc. And we have Apple CarPlay. So thank goodness this is one of the few startups out there that has said, you know what, we're going to give customers what they want. On the downside, I do find this display just a little bit on the low side. I think that they should have given us a bezel like this on the bottom, because options at the bottom of the screen, you really do end up having to slide your finger right there along the plastic to actuate them. Down here we have an altimeter and a compass. That's a really cool feature. So you can see right now I'm at 1,065 feet. Big air vents right there in the middle, and then lots of airplane style toggles and knobs and switches. This is one of the reasons that I got this vehicle, to be perfectly honest. I love knobs and switches. I think they just look cool, and I love the way that they did this with the rear defrosters. They're all big chunky buttons and switches. You can disable the auto start stop system right there. The volume knob is a little bit hidden sort of down here in the middle, awkwardly behind that shifter. I have one little spot where I can put a smartphone. You can see my phone barely fits in there. Over here we have the park assist on-off button. On the passenger side, we have soft touch materials in the upper section of the dashboard, hard trim in the middle. Again, that leather wrap to that handle, and a glove box that, you know, maybe you could fit some gloves in there, but they've got to be small gloves because it's a pretty small glove compartment, if I'm honest. Over there we have some extra storage in the doors, and here's a better view of that seat and the seat construction there. Moving back to the center console, BMW shifter over here, because again, that's all borrowed from BMW, all the transmission control stuff, etc. All BMW, so it should be easier to find parts in the future. Over here we have the control for the full-time four-wheel drive system. What's unique about this is that we have high and we have low, and we have high lock and low lock. So you can have this in the low ratio mode without a locked center coupling, something that you cannot do in a Wrangler or in a Bronco, but interestingly, you can do in something like a Lexus GX or the new Land Cruiser. But in those vehicles, you don't have a front locker as well, and this has everything locked or everything unlocked. Down here we have a controller for the infotainment system. You can use this to control it if you'd rather not touch it. I find that just a little bit awkward to use. I think I would have rather have had slightly larger cup holders. I can barely put some of these larger Yetis in there. Would like just a little bit more room. In here we find a small amount of storage, some USB ports, and this console is lockable. I also have the spare key at the moment in here. You can see it is a traditional key with a switchblade style key that pops out, because no smart key here. You actually have to put the key in the dashboard and twist it to start the car. But the thing that really sold me, and I don't know about you, I'm thinking you're probably all going to think I'm crazy, is this combination of enormous switch bank on the ceiling and the safari glass on the side. That's an option I absolutely had to get. Not only do these open to vent, you can remove them from the vehicle if you want more of that sunroof type experience. Here is what's really cool, especially for people that want to do overlanding and mod their vehicles. We have all these auxiliary switches, 25 amps, 25 amps, 10 amps, 10 amps, 10 amps, 25 amps, 500 amps right there via that one. That's that big port in the rear. You can use that to power the optional rear winch that's hitch mounted, or whatever other accessories you might want. And if you want to operate these accessories while the vehicle is off, keep in mind you're going to drain your battery, you just flick this switch while the vehicle is off, and then you can power any of them without the ignition being on. Big Grenadier logo right there. Obviously, these panels could be removed if you want to add your own accessories as well. So that's another really cool touch. Everything here can just be simply unscrewed with these Allen screws right there, the hex screws, and then you can just pull them off with that Allen wrench. Differential lockers, front lock, rear lock, off-road mode, waiting mode, exterior lights. These are the off-road lights I showed you with that sort of Citroen bumper looking portion of the front there. So you can adjust their level and then you can turn them on and off when you're in the off-road mode. We also have downhill assist. You can turn off the stability and traction control, interior lights. All these are these really chunky buttons, so no touch things or anything like that going on here. On the downside, no digital rear view mirror, no auto dimming rear view mirror either. And then one thing I should mention here are the side view mirrors. They are relatively small, and I'm not quite clear what you're supposed to see in this mirror. If I put the camera in my eye line, this mirror is tilted as far that way as I can, so I could try and hopefully see behind me. But all I really end up seeing is practically what's immediately next to the vehicle right there, and then maybe just a little bit behind me. I can't actually try and cover my blind spot. On the other hand, I have to say that we have a lot of glass in here and a very commanding view of the road, so I did get used to it on my drive, but it was something that I noticed right away. Not a lot of blind spots going on here, except for that mirror. And just for funsies, let's hear that toot again. As you'd expect with a roofline this high, headroom is fantastic. I have several inches of headroom left. I think you do get a little bit more if you don't get the Safari windows, but again, they are pretty cool. On the other hand, they're not tinted quite as much as I thought they would be, and there is no shade provided, so I think I might end up tinting these. This is what they look like when they open. You open them right like that, and then of course you can completely remove them if you want. Hopping into the back, keep in mind, of course, we have the transmission and transfer case essentially under the center section of the vehicle, so we do have some intrusion back here in the rear passenger footwell area. We have two big air vents back here in the rear. You can get an optional 400-watt inverter. I chose not to do that because I figured I could always put a bigger inverter on here if I need to. And legroom, keep in mind the wheelbase on this is shorter than a Wrangler, so we don't really find that much more legroom in the back, although I do find the seats themselves to be roomier than I had expected. This other seat is all the way back in its tracks, but at a slightly different seat back angle. You can see over here I still have a little bit of room left. I find the rear seats significantly more comfortable than the Bronco or the Wrangler for several reasons. The first one is lots more headroom. Because this was not designed to be a convertible, there's no weird bar with speakers or anything like that going on here. It's just a really high and really square roofline. Also, the sides are pretty far from my head because of that really vertical profile. And then it's a little bit less obvious, but if I grab the camera here, you'll notice that the rear bench is pretty wide, and that's because the body is significantly wider than a Bronco or a Wrangler. The across the wheel dimension is several inches wider than a Wrangler, but the body dimension is even broader than that, again because of the lack of that need for the convertible design and just that really slab-sided shape. That gives us a much wider bench seat in the back. This is actually about as wide as the average half-ton truck as far as the rear passenger dimensions go. This may be a little bit less obvious, but the rear bench is a little bit higher off the ground versus those other options, giving you significantly more leg support for adults. The rear seats move in a very traditional SUV fashion. You lift this seat bottom cushion up, and then you fold the seat backs down onto it, or you start rooting around down here for whatever it is you might want, whether that's the 12-volt battery right there, or those fuses over there, or if I can figure out how to open this other side up here, it's the subwoofer for the premium audio system, which is interestingly, it kind of looks like just a JBL off-the-shelf audio subwoofer right there in that storage area. One thing that surprised me is that there is a great deal of room going on under the rear seats. So if you wanted to locate something like an aftermarket inverter or a second 12-volt battery or something like that in here, it honestly would be pretty easy to do. As I said before, the cargo area is big and very, very square. You can see I have some roller bags back here. I haven't had the chance to do our 24-inch roller bag test, but I'm going to guess you'll be able to squeeze at least 8 back here just due to the height and the size and how boxy it is. This is the carrier for the Safari glass. Once you take them out, you can pop them in that bag if you want to just keep them from rolling around back here. And rolling around is definitely a concern because the floor in here is hard plastic, as is the seat back there. Now, if you have pets and you're worried about cleaning up messes, etc., that's great, but your pets and your bags are going to be slipping and sliding around back here unless you get one of the accessory rubber mats. As we get out on the road together, it's important to remember the mission of the Grenadier. Again, this is a very off-road focused vehicle. So if, for instance, I decided I just want to go check on my water tanks up this road right here, this is the kind of vehicle where I could definitely do it. I'm going to try and avoid that stick so I don't scratch any of this gorgeous green paintwork here. But it does pretty well on trails like this. It feels very sure-footed, even though there's lots of leaves on this, etc., because of that constant four-wheel drive system. Of course, I can turn off the park assist sensors there, but I did notice that the turning radius is a little on the large side. Part of that is because of the size of the Grenadier. It means that trying to turn around up here at the water tanks is just kind of complicated, and I don't want to fall off the edge there, so we'll just make this a many-point turn, which is the point where you will notice that the steering is definitely very heavy as well. There is not a lot of feel going on. This is a recirculating ball type steering rack, so inherently not as much feel as a rack and pinion, but also there's just not a lot of feel, period. And it doesn't return to center very easily. You can see it's really not doing anything there. You actually have to crank it all the way back around to center. So that could be a bit of a bummer for some folks. It's less of a problem out on a trail than it is out on the road, where you will certainly find yourself muscling the steering wheel around a bit more than in other vehicles in this segment. And then again, there's sort of the turning radius there. As I keep saying, keep in mind this is more of a dedicated off-road vehicle, which is why we find one of the more unique features here. I'm now in 4 low. I have a little L indicator here and this little telltale display. Again, I kind of wish it was an LCD, but we have that display there. And we have an open center differential. So it's a true center in the middle. It's splitting power front to rear, and that means that I can turn the steering wheel like this without getting any binding in the drivetrain. It feels just as natural as it did in 4 high, and of course the steering feels just about as heavy as it did in 4 high as well. But that is a really unique feature. And if I wanted to lock that center coupling, I could do that. Now let's go ahead and move it back to 4 high, because even though I theoretically could drive around on the road in 4 low, since it has that center differential, I don't really want to, because the engine's going to be spinning pretty quickly. Keep in mind that design-wise, this suspension has a lot more in common with the average tractor than it does the average SUV in North America, because we have solid axles, front and rear. The only real architectural difference between this and my tractor is that it doesn't have leaf springs. It has coil springs instead. And that gives us a little bit more suspension travel than you'd be able to get out of a leaf spring. So that's why they do that. They really want that axle and that wheel to be able to droop down to really give you the maximum traction out on a wide variety of different surfaces. The other thing I should mention here is, obviously, I love the Safari window. That's why I got it. But it's not quite as practical as a traditional powered sunroof, because I have the panel off, and if I wanted to put the panel back on, I have to grab it from where I have it stored over there in the passenger footwell, get out of the vehicle, put it on, latch it back into place, etc. If you're in an area where you may or may not get some sprinkles during the day, you might think twice about actually removing the panel. And I am having a little bit of buyer's remorse, not specific about buying the panel, but about removing it at this exact moment, because right now it's 38 degrees outside. Out on the road, I've got to level with you. The Grenadier is not about engaging steering feel and impeccable driving dynamics. If you were looking for the perfect SUV to drive down this road twice the speed limit, this would not be on that list. In fact, this is the kind of vehicle that really begs to be driven a little bit slower. I find myself driving 5-10 miles an hour slower on this road than practically any other SUV that I've driven, even though actual grip numbers wise, it's just fine. It's just the feel of everything. The Grenadier is heavy, it is big, and it feels big and heavy thanks to those solid axles and just the amount of disconnection that we get in everything. This is the kind of SUV where when you're going around corners like this, you'll find yourself constantly correcting the steering a little bit, and you'll notice that even these small jerks of the steering, they're really not adjusting the course of the Grenadier truly that much, just because of the design of the suspension, the design of the steering rack, and the design of the vehicle itself. We have a road closed up here because a huge redwood tree fell over a few nights ago, and they still haven't cleaned it up, so everybody's still without power. So let's just tootle up this road. Where this vehicle more comes into its own is on this smaller side road, because we've had high winds, we've had a lot of rain, lots of leaves and pine needles have fallen on this road surface, and it is absolutely slick. In fact, it's so slick that other all-wheel drive vehicles that we have been testing this week really found traction to be a bit of a problem. Obviously, some of the traction is due to the tire design on this vehicle, which is more aggressive than the average crossover or SUV in America, but it also has to do with the four-wheel drive system. Because this does not have a clutch pack in the middle that it has to connect and disconnect to send power to the front axle, it feels much more sure-footed than systems that have a 4 auto mode rather than a 4 full-time mode. You'll definitely notice a huge difference between this and the average 4-wheel drive truck in America, even the models with that 4 auto mode. Also, the suspension does a really good job even out on these big dips and huge potholes on this road surface, the muddy sides of the road that we've had to drive in because of oncoming traffic coming just way too in the center of the road. This is the exact kind of vehicle for this kind of rural living, which is also why I was so interested in it, because this is clearly where I live. Roads like this can definitely be an upper body workout in the Grenadier because the steering is so heavy. The other thing you'll probably notice out on some of these road surfaces is that the cabin is not as quiet as you might think. And that is somewhat surprising for a body-on-frame design like this, where you would generally find more isolation between the frame and the body than a unibody SUV. But there is definitely kind of a drum-like thump in the back if you're on a poorly paved road surface that we don't see in all the competition. I don't know if there's going to be a solution from Grenadier for that, but it's something that I've heard from other drivers out there. I haven't been able to do any official cabin noise tests because it has been so wet and muddy out there. Hopefully that will be coming soon. But in my unofficial test on a slightly different road surface that was dry, I ended up measuring about 78 decibels in here, which certainly makes this much louder than the average. Also know that if you get mud terrain tires, things are going to be louder because the tires themselves are going to be making a lot more noise. And that's part of the reason that I decided to go with the all-terrain tires first, and then just see if I wanted to get mud terrains or something like that later if I wanted to take this more aggressively off-roading. I think these tires are a decent balance for most shoppers out there. Fuel economy, that's actually been a little bit better than I had expected. This one's EPA rated for 15 miles per gallon combined. On my journey up from Pasadena, where I actually took a much more rural route than US 101 or I-5, I ended up averaging 17 miles per gallon, and that shocked me because this is such a big, blocky, bricky vehicle that I had honestly expected fuel economy to be much worse. Now, so far in my daily driving routine, I've only been able to do the round trip once so far. Then the average did drop a little bit further down. It was actually at 14.9 miles per gallon, but pretty close to the EPA numbers. One last thing I should mention out on the road is that the electronic nannies that we do have on this vehicle are somewhat annoying. Supposedly a software fix is coming soon, and there are fewer nannies than you might expect. So no radar cruise control here, no lane centering. We do have lane departure warning, but it turns itself back on every time you turn the car on. You cannot just turn that feature off. And for a vehicle that's really focused on rural living, I find that to be surprising because on rural roads, especially narrow rural roads, you may find yourself needing to move over here and there for cyclists or tractors going by or deer or turkeys or whatever might be on the road. There are reasons that you need to cross the line here and there. The other thing that's annoying is the overspeed warning. That's another thing that turns itself on every time you turn the car on. Supposedly there's going to be a software update to fix that, but we don't know exactly when that's going to happen. At the moment, it just does a ding, ding, ding every time you exceed the speed limit by any number of miles an hour. That's also not adjustable. If those are features that you're worried about, stay tuned because again, we own this Grenadier, so hopefully that software update is going to come out pretty soon, and I'll be able to tell all of you about it when it does. If you're interested in a new Grenadier or you want to check one out for yourself, head over to the Ineos Grenadier website and find a local dealer near you. Yes, they are going to be sold through dealers. They're not doing direct sales in North America, but keep in mind that not all the dealers are open yet. Some of them are in the process of being built, some of them are in the process of signing their franchise agreements, etc. So there is a little bit of variation depending on where you live in the United States. For instance, there is a Grenadier dealer much closer to me than Pasadena, which is about 5 hours away, but that dealership is not going to be open until either the end of February or early March. So I had Rusnak Pasadena transfer the order to them. They were very helpful in this process, so a big shout out to them, big thank you to them as well. And if you are waiting on a Grenadier, maybe you can transfer it to another dealer like them so you could take delivery earlier. Interestingly, I got my Grenadier one day after our friends over at TFL got their Grenadier because we were both absolutely smitten by it when we were driving it in the UK. They got a different set of options though. We may do a meetup in the future, so let us know if you're interested in that. They obviously got a different color, they got different tires, they got KO2s rather than these all-terrain tires on this model. They also chose not to get the trailering package, so they don't have a hitch in the rear, so we'll be doing some towing tests. They won't be with their Grenadier. We got the optional button bank on the inside, the premium audio system, and the Safari windows because they were really cool. I just absolutely had to check those option boxes as well. And then I skipped some of the styling options they chose, like the diamond plate on the front end, etc. I just decided not to go in that direction. All in, this particular model was $84,000 plus tax. It started at $71,500, and then the options that I selected, of course, bumped it up to that $84,000 price point. One thing that I wish all Grenadiers would come standard with in North America would be a front locker, because the front locker is really what differentiates this vehicle from so many other off-road alternatives, especially something like the new Land Cruiser, the Lexus GX, etc. Toyota really does not want to do front lockers in their vehicles, and that really sets this apart from that segment. The other thing that, of course, really sets it apart is the solid front axle itself. Very, very different than a Bronco or a G-Wagon or that Land Cruiser yet again. And that's entirely a reason unto itself that you might want to choose a Grenadier over some of those other options. There's a lot going on in this, $70,000 to $100,000 off-road price point. Lots of different options out there. The Grenadier is one of the quirkiest and I think most interesting and most interesting looking for sure, but it's not going to be the right fit for everybody, especially if you really do want to look at this as a daily driver kind of vehicle and you don't live in an area like I do, where I'm really driving on gravel roads quite frequently. I have to drive on gravel roads every day. Inclement weather, trees down here and there, so things like the winches and the four-wheel drive capability can be very handy for me. If you are simply living in suburbia going to urban America and then occasionally doing some off-roading, there may be a slightly better fit for you. Let me know what you think about all that and stay tuned for additional content. Also, let me know what questions you have that you would like us to answer in future videos down there. Find us over at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all those other places. See all of you next week.